Wow, I love doing drops, but sometimes they can be quite scary and they don't have to be. So I've been doing drops pretty much my entire life, from going to Red Bull Rampage to riding bike park like this one. And in this video, I'm gonna teach you how to approach these drops so you can feel safer on your bike, have more fun, and also go bigger. So let's do it.
What does this guy know about teaching drops? He's just good at them.
Okay.
Find a smaller one that has a long landing. Judging your speed is really important. I'm as tall as I could possibly be. A press ensures that we stabilize us and the bike together. And this helps us sort of adjust the attitude of the bike in the air so that we can try and land both wheels together.
Drops always make me nervous, but in this video I'm gonna help you to gain the skills and the confidence required to have fun doing them. And I am joined by Ross Dunlop from Global Syndicate of Mountain Bike Coaches, and he's gonna help us to basically get the foundations required to do drops like this one safely. For the little story, we actually filmed that video a couple weeks ago. I was really happy with the result, but somehow I managed to lose the footage. So thanks Ross for being back with me here at Grouse Mountain Bike Park. So let's get started.
Yeah, sounds good.
So same idea as the how to jump video we just did recently. Can you walk us through the process of drops?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me again, Remy. This is cool. Yeah, similar to what we covered in the jump video, I think the cool thing here is there's a lot of similarities with drops. And we might as well start with the first one, which is, again, to revisit the run-in. Couple of differences with the run-in here with the drop, though. We've got the run-in, but in this one, this is a flat drop. So flat drops typically don't have a transition like a jump would. But still, we've got the lip, we've got the landing, you know, the knuckle and the landing there. But the key thing when it comes to the run-in is our line of sight. So if we kind of go a bit further back here, when we're back here, you know, we obviously want to scope a drop, but right now I don't know where the landing is relative to the takeoff. And so what I want to do is try and buy myself as much time to be able to make a move, to maybe make an adjustment. Because once I'm here, ideally I don't want to be touching my brakes. I don't want to be pedaling because that can destabilize us.
So that's the same idea, that's our point of commitment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Ideally the point of commitment should be enough time that you could potentially slow down safely. Here, if we're coming in at a jogging speed, I could probably slow down before the drop like you did just then. So here is probably my point of commitment. But after this point, I kind of want to avoid adjusting speed, either through pedaling or braking. But here, the goal really is to try and ensure that we're centered, much like in our drops. So riding it in that nice, tall, stacked neutral position does two things. Guarantees that we're centered, but also it gives us an improved line of sight. I'm as tall as I could possibly be. Therefore, as I'm cruising into the drop, you know, I still can't see the landing, but about, for me, here is when I first start to see the landing. And this does give me enough time to make some adjustments. I might preload the bike to be able to allow me to launch out a little bit if I need, or I can decide, do I need to push down and absorb quite heavily to kind of match that landing and not overshoot?
Yeah, no, that's a totally fair point. I feel like in my video, I always encourage people to ride tall in that neutral position so you can react to the terrain quicker and better, but also you can see further so you can pick up better lines. In this case, the line is pretty straight, but what you have to adjust is your speed and how you react on the drop so you can match the distance of the drop so you don't either case it or overshoot it. So riding tall is going to allow you to see the landing sooner and therefore have proper technique. Now, if we talk about technique on a drop like that, what are we doing with the bike and with our body?
Yeah, so similar to the jumps, we can adjust dials. In this one, again, the same one is our press. Our press ensures that we stabilize us and the bike together before takeoff.
So basically, we preload the suspension?
Yeah, exactly, and primarily just through the feet. And that way we load both tires evenly. And then as we go off the drop, we can absorb the bike up into us and do what we call a little bit of a poke. And so you absorb and poke to get the bike to kind of trim down towards the landing. And this helps us sort of adjust the attitude of the bike in the air so that we can try and land both wheels together.
So would you say that on drops or on jumps, you should be landing both wheels together, or should you sometimes land a little bit nose heavy or rear heavy? What's the correct approach?
I think there's pros and cons to each one, and it's kind of situational, as you know. I think obviously the ideal, if you have space in the landing, is to land both evenly. That way both front and rear suspension can help you out. Short landings, for example, or what people might call sniper landings, those are ones I feel are ones that you might end up trying to land a little bit front wheel first. And then ultimately your front wheel and your rear wheel land in the same spot. So if the landing is quite technical, maybe it's got roots, rocks, pretty rough.
Or very short.
Yeah, exactly. I think anytime you have a drop that's particularly flat, that might be advantageous to land rear wheel first. As you see, trials riders like Danny McCaskill, sometimes if they're doing big drops to flat, they land and they kind of use that leverage to kind of decelerate over a bit of time.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about the landing a little bit further. But if we go back to the takeoff, so we've got the approach, you mentioned the press, what else there is to know before basically being in the air?
Obviously judging your speed is really important. The things that we can adjust with drops are speed of approach, the when and how much we press, and the when and how much we absorb and poke the bike out. And these are all things that, as riders, we want to have an adjustability within our skill set to do, so we have adaptability to do different drops.
Yeah.
But in this one in particular, I think this one is known for having quite a long run-in, so there is potential to overshoot this quite a lot because it's not a far drop.
And it's a very simple run-in.
Yeah, exactly.
With no skills, you can go very fast. So this is more like slowing yourself down enough that you are not gonna be going too fast,
yeah,
or as we say, too big on the jump. Those are like really good points, and I feel like myself or even any rider competing at Red Bull Rampage is struggling to judge the speed, mostly because on most drops you don't really see where is the landing until quite close to the takeoff.
Of course, too late almost.
So do you have any tips for us to help manage that speed?
I think a big part of it is definitely getting mileage under your belt with just experience, knowing how a certain speed will result in a certain distance or a drop size. Cool thing about drops is, like, often when they're a flat takeoff is, there's lots of versions of that around trail centers and bike parks. So my big suggestion is, if you're looking to build confidence for bigger, more consequential drops, is find a smaller one that has a long landing that you can start to stretch out how far down the landing you go. And
kind of like a ski jump.
Yeah, exactly. And quite often when we're coaching this to manage a bit of risk, is we'll even sort of scratch in a line further down the landing and make that our imaginary knuckle. And even at the point, I might ride in and see where that line is, and then I can make the adjustment. Do I need to add more press to get out?
So you have like basically a target that you can practice on that is safe. Because obviously a drop like this, there is a knuckle. So your target or your sweet spot will be to land right past the knuckle. But you can't really practice, because if you go too short or too long, well, there is consequences. Whereas if you have a very long downhill and you have that visual target, you can go a bit longer, a bit shorter, and it's safe. That's the idea, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when we're learning this kind of stuff, mistakes are going to happen. You're going to maybe come in a bit too fast. But if we have a long landing, we can allow for safe mistakes. Then that'll give us, that repetition over time, so that we just have that sort of knowledge based on practice, that we can just trust skills when it really matters, when there is a gap, when the drop is big.
So now, as we've looked at the running and the takeoff, you mentioned that press, so we preload the suspension. Now my front wheel is taking off. How do I do so I don't get kicked forward? So basically, so I don't go nose heavy on the drop. Because the bigger the drop is, the more time you have to go over the bar. So obviously that's scary.
Yeah, I think, and one of the goals of the press is to make sure that the front wheel doesn't just drop off. When you press, you're giving the front wheel enough time to stay unweighted. I think though at this stage it's important to not necessarily think about something like a bunny hop too much. Anytime we load the rear of that bike up, that creates a leverage that can kind of push us forwards. But yeah, as long as we're kind of creating that little bit of a press. And then we can even use things like using a little bit of a scoop motion with our feet to be able to absorb the bike up into us. Because I think, yeah, one of the fears of people is that the rear wheel will hang up. But that's partly why the press is there. That's a big reason why the absorb is there. So we're not got weight in the back wheel as it's going off.
So you press, you essentially preload the suspension, and as your front wheel takes off and the rear wheel is about to take off, what do you do with the rebound basically? Because you compress the suspension. Do you kind of suck up the energy a little bit of the suspension?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think one key point here is that there is range to this. There's some drops out there where literally you can ride off just standing there because you've got great trail speed. And then you literally don't really have to do much. And the press only comes from your weight and gravity pushing down on the bike. There are some though that you might need to do a lot. And like I said, that's those ones where you maybe need to go out a bit further. And then there's some where you're trying to get rid of that air time, and you're more biasing that full absorption. So you're absorbing the edge off that drop.
Okay. Anything to do in the air? So I've taken off, I feel pretty stable. Do I do something special?
I think the key thing with this is if you've done all the right moves at the takeoff, it's just enjoy the airtime.
So just like the how to jump video we just did.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you've set yourself up with good conditions for flight, you can just enjoy the flight. It should feel nice. You could maybe add a little bit of style as you get more comfortable with it.
And that's something we mention it in the how to jump videos, but the more skill you get in the air, and you build that by coming to bike park like this one and doing things over and over, and riding the same trail and the same drop in that specific case, different way. You go a little bit slower than usually, a little bit faster than usually, and then you get to develop the skills of pushing down the bike or helping the bike to travel a little bit further. And by doing all of that and practicing those skills, you really get all what's needed to be able to adapt to different situations and also changes on the trail itself. The same drop redone when it's bone dry like today and really fast is not gonna be the same than when it's wet and pretty slippery and your bike struggles to carry speed. Now if we look at the landing, you mentioned ideally we land on a drop like this, both wheels together. How does that work? Do I basically use my leg and my arms together to help the bike? Do I get the bike to do most of the work and then squat down? What do I do?
At touchdown?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think at touchdown, I think it's important that we want to be in a good, strong position and actually use our bones to do a lot of the structural sort of like stabilizing. I think one mistake some people make with drops is they actually try and absorb a lot. But we've got these nice spikes, good suspension, especially if it's set up well, to take a lot of that hit for us. So really it's more about us landing, still being strong and having a little bit of give, but we don't want to try and absorb a ton. When we're landing into drops and there's a downslope, the downslope will help dissipate that energy. Sometimes when you see BMXers in the street, they're really absorbing, but they don't have suspension, they've got really hard tires. Also, they're usually doing stair sets to flat, so they're having to really absorb.
Yeah.
But in this one, if we absorb, that can push us back, and delay a negative result. with a good landing, if we actually stay a little bit, we use a little bit of our initial travel with in our bodies, but then resist, then that will allow the force to go forward.
Yeah, what I've noticed, and whether it's a drop that's a couple feet or, you know, quite literally 30, 40, 50 feet, the first thing that's gonna take the impact is your tires. They're gonna compress, then it's gonna push through the suspension and even the flex of the bike. That could be flex of your handlebar, the flex of the frame, the flex of your rim. Everything basically flexes on the bike, and I find that you want the bike to first compress, and once the bike basically gets to the end of the compression and it doesn't go any further before the bike comes back to its initial position, so before it rebounds, that's when you push your own weight and basically squat down. And I feel like you want to take your time, you want to almost push onto the bike, but without wanting to rebound really fast, because I feel like that's when people just basically pogo stick and, you know, lose their feet off the pedal, for example,
Yeah.
or bounce.
Exactly.
Talking about landing, I really wish we had our buddy Steve Matthews from Vorsprung Suspension to help us. We actually filmed the videos the other week and he gave us answers to a bunch of the different issues that you could have with your bike when you land. What should we do?
I don't know, maybe we could call him.
That's a good
That
idea.
could work.
Let me do a little break and introduce you to the partner of this video. It is available on Jensen USA, so make sure you check out the link down below. It is Ergon Bike. Been working with the brand for the past 8 years and they make mountain bike products specifically designed for every discipline. This, for example, is a SM Enduro saddle. I actually use it on my Propane Spin Drift, which is right over there. It's got a short rear end, which is perfect for bikes with a lot of travel, really comfortable for big days on the trails, and also it's got an ergonomic shape, which is really nice for when you ride downhill and actually use the seats. I've also got my all-time favorite grip, the Ergon GDH. They work perfectly with or without gloves. I feel like they give me a really precise control over the bike while preventing arm pumps. So if you want to learn more about the Ergon product, check out the link down below. Now let's keep on riding. Okay, let's do those drops. How are you?
Yeah.
Hey Siri, call Steve Matthews Vorsprung. Let's see if he answers.
You calling me, dude?
Oh, Steve, how are you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. So we got a little bit of an issue. You
Right.
remember that video we did at Grouse Bike Park the other week?
Yeah.
I managed to lose some of the footage.
Ah.
So I'm gonna have to ask you again those questions.
Okay.
Looking at drops,
Mhm.
can you explain us a little bit what's going on in terms of physics and in terms of bike suspension as we take off, but also as we land?
Well, the takeoff's really straightforward. The suspension has almost nothing to do with it. If you got a flat takeoff and you're just riding off it, then everything is technique and timing and speed. There's not really a suspension element to the takeoff. So, assuming you judge your speed correctly, you have your, angle of your bike correct, your body position is all taken care of. The suspension has virtually nothing to do with it. The landing is a bit of a different story, but fortunately with drops, it's pretty simple. You've just got one big impact to deal with most of the time. And so that means you really need to worry about spring rate, progression, and compression damping to some extent. Spring rate tends to dominate, so you need something that's stiff enough to absorb the impact. The progression is really the ramp up. So whether that's coming from hydraulic bottom out on coil, fork or shock, or air spring ramp up, then setting that with your tokens. The progression is really what gives you the ability to have a stiff end stroke, so you can deal with big impacts without having to compromise all of the rest of the travel for the rest of the trails in the bike park.
So would you say that the bigger the drops you do are, the more progressivity you need?
Typically, but once you get to a certain point, you also just need more spring rate, because if you're going to jump off something that's 20 feet high, then you can't really just rely on the last couple of inches of travel to save you from everything, right? You need to be absorbing that energy from throughout the whole track. And compression damping can help with that. It helps more on the rear than with the fork typically, because fork dampers are typically very lightly valved compared to rear shocks, particularly in compression.
And why is that?
Basically because you've got the weight of your hands on the front. Your hands are a lot more sensitive than your feet, so they can take less of a beating on small bumps. And as a result, you can run quite a lot more compression damping in the rear than in the front. You know, typically it can be as much as 3 times more. So it's a pretty big difference. And that means that with the fork, trying to set your high-speed compression damping to absorb really big impacts, single big impacts like that, it's generally just not that effective. Like the spring just does a lot more. And so it's not that it does nothing, but it's, you know, it's making a difference of 5-10%, whereas the spring can be, you know, virtually infinite change if we're talking about an air sprung unit. On the rear, it'll make more of a difference. It does depend on the damper. Some shocks, the high-speed compression adjustment doesn't do all that much. Some it does a lot. Really depends exactly on the unit that you're running. Low-speed compression has little to no impact on most shocks, like virtually nothing, unless you're landing really smoothly. But if you're landing that smoothly, then you don't need to be worried in the first place.
You're talking about progressivity. You mentioned that progressivity to some extent is managed by the frame, but also volume spacer on air suspension. How about a coil suspension like the Takeoff?
Typically, so on the rear end of the bike, you'll have progression that comes through the linkage of the frame. Some frames are adjustable with that. The Takeoff has hydraulic bottom out adjustment. So that is really your end stroke catch there. With that said, you don't have the same degree of spring rate progression that you do from an air spring still. So you're relying on a different mechanism to catch you at the end of the travel there. The Takeoff has a very effective high-speed adjuster, and if you're doing a lot of really big hits, revalve it. Like, we have the rapid revalve system there for a reason. If you find that, you know, if you're going to go to a bike park where you're doing much bigger hits than you are in your typical day-to-day riding, then by all means use a firmer compression tube.
Yeah, I mean that's why it's for. On the smash pod, which is the coil conversion for forks, obviously you remove the air spring to put a coil instead for the benefits of a more comfortable ride, basically. How do you manage progressivity?
So with the smash pod at 180 mil travel and higher, we use 2 springs, so you have a progressive spring rate to begin with. But it's really the hydraulic bottom out that gives you that bottoming control, and that's what it's built to do. It does that in the last 40 or so millimeters of the travel. That gives you like a hydraulic bumper. Basically, they'll slow you down right at the end of the travel, so you're not just clanging off the bottom of the travel. Okay. Avoid that car crash feeling.
So you've talked about spring rate as the most important, progressivity, then compression.
Yep.
But how about rebound? I feel like that's a topic that comes back often, where people are scared to basically bounce and get thrown over the bar at the landing. What can you tell us?
It has some effect, especially on, like, if you have impacts that are so big that your whole body is just at its absolute limit in dealing with it, and you're folded around the bike by the time it's kicking back, then yeah, it can have some impact. So if you're going to rampage and jumping off stuff that size, then yeah, the rebound damping has an impact. Typically though, if you're getting bounced, it's because you're just clanging off the bottom out bumper that hard, or because you're not actually absorbing enough of it with your body, right? So that's something that Ross can chat about if he hasn't already. But really getting bounced like that, the rebound damping is not typically a determining factor for most people in most circumstances. Where it does become a bit more critical is if you really need to stabilize the bike, because there's another feature immediately after the landing of the drop. So if you've got a drop with a short landing and then, you know, another drop, a jump, whatever, you need the bike to be recovered and stabilized before you hit that next thing, whatever that is. It might even just be like a really chundery corner. More damping, both compression and rebound, helps settle things faster for sure. And so that can help with that.
And as you mentioned, and in my experience of doing drops, and whichever is the size, like a bike park drop or a rampage drop, spring rate is key. And I find that I always surprise myself every time I go to do features like the one at rampage. I always underestimate how much spring rate I should be running in order to have like a smooth landing.
Yeah.
But I think the one super key element as you make adjustment to either the rear or the front of the bike is to keep in mind that the bike should be balanced. Because if you do the adjustment and you land your big drop, your shock is stiffer and you've done everything you need to have a smooth ride on the bike, but you haven't adjusted the front. Obviously that's gonna create an imbalance and potentially make you bounce and lose control.
Yeah.
As we are wrapping up the video, just a little thing that we haven't mentioned earlier with Ross is managing the speed correctly for the drop is obviously key. It is one of the hardest things to do regardless of your skills. Obviously the most experience you have, the easier it is to get the speed. But one tip I have is to, as much as possible, looking for a reference point that's gonna be at the same level as the knuckle of the landing. Ideally, you want to land just past the knuckle of the landing, but often on the drop, you don't see the landing until you are committed to jump and until it's too late to make speed adjustment or sometimes body position adjustment. So if you can have that information sooner by standing up tall on the bike and looking at potentially a tree on the side of the landing that is where you want to land in terms of distance, that's gonna be very helpful. Well, Steve, thanks a lot for answering my phone call so quickly.
Yep.
What is this?
This is for you to try on your Econo. Let us know how you like the changes.
Okay, thanks a lot. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave us a like, a comment, check out the link down below. See you next week. Okay, I'll do that.